Welcome to Awakenings in Real Life, where we tell inspiring stories of transformation, meaning, and hope. While we typically think of an awakening as a getting up or something religious or spiritual in nature, it's also a recognition, realization, or awareness of something. We're going to share stories of people triumphing over loss, illness, addiction, trauma, bullying, near-death experience, and more. Please enjoy. Hi, this is Dan Cohen, and welcome to Awakenings in Real Life, the podcast. Our guest today is Julian Raven. How are you today, Julian?
I'm doing great, Dan. Thank you for having me on.
It's my pleasure, and I look forward to the audience hearing your story. So I'm going to give the people at home a little background on who you are. Julian Raven is a British-born, Spanish-raised American artist, author, entrepreneur, and First Amendment activist. After being a U.S. missionary and Bible student, Raven's journey went from the pulpit to the Supreme Court. Raven made news when his Trump portrait was rejected by the Smithsonian in 2016, launching an 8-year legal battle reaching the Supreme Court and resulting in his becoming an official Smithsonian reformer. Representing himself through 2 federal cases, Raven's challenge to government overreach landed him number 4 on President Trump's list of reasons to fire Kim Sajet, then director of the National Portrait Gallery. He tells that full story in his book, Odious and Cerberus, An American Immigrant's Odyssey, and his free speech legal war against Smithsonian corruption. Well, I can't wait to get into that story because I'm actually an ex-attorney, Julian, so I'm fascinated that you did this battle on your own.
Wonderful.
So,
yeah, it is a legal enigma that I think most legal minds will enjoy listening to.
Right. And I think the audience at home is going to listen to 2 terrific accents, your British accent and my Brooklyn accent. So we should have people entertained. Anyway, the first question I ask guests is what was your awakening in real life? And you actually had 2. So I want to focus more on the second one, but certainly talk to us about the first one as well.
Well, the first one would be my coming to faith. As a former atheist, I had a remarkable divine encounter on a mountain in southern Spain. I was all alone. I was seeking the truth, a passionate truth seeker, yet I was hopeless, lost in a world of drugs and alcohol. I was suicidal because I was so depressed that life was not giving me the answers. And as much as I could see this remarkable spellbinding beauty and nature around me. I mean, Spain, where I grew up, was beautiful. The world around me was just awful, and humanity seemed to be awful in many ways. Obviously, a lot of wonderful good as well, but a lot of just hopelessness and sort of defaulting to hedonism as an escape from reality. You know, where I grew up with, it was very much a lifestyle of the area. And I was just, as much as it was like medicine for me, because I didn't have the answers and I was hopeless, I was desperate inside to know those answers. And so I'd find myself in nature, sitting on a mountain or walking in the woods or looking at the reflection of the full moon on the sea, or by myself at 2, 3, 4, 5 in the morning. I just always found myself panting after the truth, like, I got to find the answers. And nature was the only clear sort of witness to me of something consistently amazing, perfect, beautiful, fascinating, just constantly arresting my attention, whereas the chaos of the world of men was the reverse. And it was there on that mountaintop in southern Spain where God decided to reveal himself to me as the designer and creator of all things, which I had never considered. No one had ever proposed that to me. I had rejected religion,
Wow.
rejected any notion of God, and yet it took somebody to just hit him, basically to show himself and say, I'm the one who did all this. And my eyes were opened. It's as if scales fell off my eyes. And I had a marvelous, marvelous, transformative awakening.
That path is now leading to what you and you've described to me as your next awakening. So from there, and what turns into your love of the United States and the culture, it led you to a really different path, but related to everything you just said.
Absolutely.
So why don't
It's all related, yeah, because here in America, you know, our how can I say, the consciousness of being American, from my perspective, what I came to believe, is it was an expression. You know, whether you read the Mayflower Compact, it's a direct expression. It says 43 words that clearly express the intent of these people to come to this country to build a new world, basically. But it was founded and rooted in the ideas of faith, the Christian faith, and that's clearly embedded in the ideas at the founding of this country. So those things then became part of my, your everyday life. And so when you begin to see those things being destroyed or, as you do sadly in Europe, being abandoned, and yet I believe they were the very boundaries that were necessary and the instruments that were necessary to create the freedoms that we had, to allow for the ingenuity and the prosperity and the creativity and all of the wonderful ways in which human beings could become all that they were meant to be here in America. As I saw those things being undermined, I then was like, well, I need to stand up and say something. And so that's where I sort of,
Let me jump in again. So your faith in the American system, clearly, and your belief in America, right, was very positive. And then then you had another awakening where you started to lose that faith related to a portrait you did. Am I correct? Is that?
Yeah, well, it's not losing my faith in the system. It's unfortunately, I've run up against people who go into the system and they begin to use it for their own personal agenda. And they use the power and position and authority that they have, and they use it to try to silence people who disagree with them. And that's what I began to experience, whether it was in the Christian faith, as a Christian, whether I was ministering in a Christian capacity, and I came up against it. And they would use their power to try to silence. And then that happened in the arts, as both a Christian artist, as a newborn citizen of the United States, because I became a citizen in 2015. I then encountered at the highest level, you could say in government-run or government-controlled artistic environments, I then encountered this hostility. And the lack of faith, it's more disappointment, just complete, just like discouragement at how people can be so disingenuous and so, deliberately, how can I say, deceptive as well as Machiavellian, where they use their system, the power of the system, to enforce their agenda to silence speech. And so my then next awakening, in the sense, is coming to a place of understanding in that setting what the law was and how the law could become this tool for my next stage or the next battle that I would be involved in for the last 9 years.
I think we're all on bated breath to hear that story, which involves a painting you did, because you are an artist. So why don't you give the background and a little bit of what happened?
Absolutely. Obviously, the story is in the book, Odious and Cerberus. I have a copy here just so that folks at home can see the title and the picture there. But my journey, again, I just sort of walk by faith in my life, and I just end up in these situations. I don't look for them. I'm just living out my life. After being inspired in 2015 to paint this portrait, and as a New Yorker, Donald Trump had expressed a desire to run for governor in 2014. People that I knew and myself were like, well, business, and we could really do with some business savvy in the leadership of the state. Didn't happen. 2015, he comes down the escalator, and I'm like, wow, that's really interesting. And but the interesting part is I was very encouraged at that point, but then that encouragement turned to being inspired to paint this painting. Now, Dan, I don't know how in depth you'd like me to go into that, but that's for you.
Well, we're going to show the painting for people watching on YouTube and Spotify, but I think it's important that you explain the painting as best you can. I mean, I would give the general sense of it, and I'll leave it to you how detailed you want to go. But I think it's important for you to describe the painting.
Wonderful. Well, the painting was like all of the streams of my experience in America all coming together at the same time. Like I said, 2015, I become a citizen. I've lived now years in the United States where I've come to know this country, and the painting became an expression of both my concern for the direction of the nation, looking to see if politics and politicians can be and have been instruments to bring about change that can be positive, to restore what's been lost or build something new. I mean, there's always different ways to do that. So what happened in 2015 after I saw Donald Trump coming down the escalator was, I'm like, yeah, this is really, really interesting. And I immediately began to think of painting a painting. I knew the story of the very famous Obama Hope poster. It's a digitized print from the internet by Shepard Fairey. I knew it from 2008, 2009, and then through the Obama presidency. And I was right at the cusp, obviously, with Trump, standing up. Most people thought it was a joke. And I was like, no, I'm listening. And I was one day listening to him speak on my computer, and I could hear what he was saying. And in my mind, I have this sort of picture of the words unafraid and unashamed, like ticker taping across the screen of my mind. And I see a picture of an American flag on a flagpole falling to the ground. And right before it touches the ground, this bald eagle swoops in and snatches up the image. So I have the face of Donald Trump in my mind, because I wasn't watching a video, I was just listening to him speak. But in my mind, I see his face, and then I see this eagle and this flag, and obviously these American symbols. And for weeks, I meditated on this picture, and I hesitated because I was like, yeah, there's a lot of a lot of fire around this guy right now. The media was all crazy at the time he was saying things. It was like, well, if I do this, I knew it would push me into a corner. And I was somewhat of a fledgling artist at the time, although I'd been an artist all of my life. I'd become a professional artist in 2010 while I was back in Spain. And so, I'm newly back in being an artist, trying to build a career. And I'm like, boy, if I do this, it could be really good or it could be really bad. It could.
We're worried about potential repercussions.
Absolutely, because of the controversy. And so I hesitated, and I waited for nearly 5 weeks. And then I have this amazing experience. And this is transformative for me, because everything that's happened since then was because of that. I have this picture, I have this unafraid and unashamed, and this picture in my mind, but I'm not doing anything. And then finally one day I'm like, you know what, I've got to sit down at my computer. I've got to start developing some ideas here. So I sit down at my computer one night, and I'm working on studying eagles, bald eagles, learning how when they come down and snatch fish out of the lakes or the streams, and watching videos, looking at photographs. And I get some pictures, and I'm sort of screenshotting images to build a bird that I could use in this image in my mind, snatching. It would be a flag and not a fish. And on my screen are these pictures of my little daughter at the time, Victoria. She's 13 at the time. She walks in behind my desk, and she looks at the pictures on the screen, and she says, "Dad, are you going to build a sculpture of an eagle?" Because at the time I was actually working in steel. And I hadn't said anything to my family about what I'd been thinking for the last 5 weeks. We had been talking, we discussed politics, all of those things, but I never discussed anything in detail. And I was sort of hesitant to say what I was thinking. And I sort of then said, well, actually, I'm going to paint painting. I just told her enough that she would know I was going to paint and not make a sculpture. And she says, well, Dad, why don't you paint a painting of the eagle and give it to Donald Trump, that when he becomes president, he can hang it in the White House. Now, this is a 13-year-old girl. This is probably now August, maybe, or July. No, it's July. It's like maybe in the middle of July 2015. And I stared at her, and I was like, wow, she didn't know what she had said to me. I was like, wow, that's amazing that she would say, well, when he becomes president, he can hang it in the White House. She said that. She had no idea what I was thinking. That to me was like, this is stunning. And I was like totally, like my attention was really sharpened because I'd been hesitating all of those weeks. And now I'm like brought to a point. So I'm working on that night. Now the next morning, this to me became for me what was just life-changing. I get on the computer early, like 6 a.m., and I'm on CNN, or 7 o'clock it might have been, and there was a new posting. It said, it was of Donald Trump, but he couldn't see what it was. It was just like a headline. It said, I had a visitor today, and it was like that morning at Trump Tower. They just posted this little video, and I click on it, and it starts rolling, and there's Donald Trump standing in his office in Trump Tower, and it's the only image, and this was stunning to me. He's standing there with a bald eagle perched on his arm. And I'm like, thinking about a bald eagle for 6 weeks and Donald Trump's face and the flag. My daughter says what she says the night before. And now suddenly there's this guy standing in his office. It looked fake to me, Dan. It looked like I didn't even believe what I was seeing, to be honest with you, on my screen. I was staring like, what am I seeing? Is this a Photoshop? Someone's playing a trick on me? Because even the way that the photo, it was by Time magazine, the way that they lit him up, it was like it looked superimposed. And so he's standing there with a bald eagle on his arm. I'm like, oh, gotta be kidding me. I'm like, I jumped out of my chair. I ran to my car. I go down to my studio where I'm standing now. And I build this massive 7 by 15 foot stretch a canvas on it. Big endeavor. It's a big painting. And I begin to paint, not even knowing fully, because I'd only made some initial sketches there of the bird. I didn't even know what I was going to do. I just had the face. I had the bird, I had the flag, I had this drama of the snatching, falling flag. And I was like, and I start painting, and I basically worked out the painting on this massive canvas for the next, I think it was about 6 weeks again, about 600 hours.
What's interesting to me is that when you said the words, the title of the painting came to you, it's not an exact comparison, but you had an inspiration, almost like you were inspired on the mountain.
Absolutely.
Came to you. So I find that interesting. And maybe the story is there's no coincidences too. You're talking about your daughter, and the next thing you see on TV gave you the validation to go forward with your thoughts.
Absolutely. That's exactly the point, because I was hesitating, because I was obviously, should I do this? Or I don't know if I can afford to do this. I might just sink my ship. I didn't know. And then the night with my daughter, that's one validation. You're like, and that's an external. Nobody knew. She didn't know. So I didn't, we talked about Trump. Of course we had. But she didn't know what I was thinking. And so she says specifically, and then the next morning, now it's like, okay, my daughter could have been influenced. We'd had talked about Trump at the table. But the next morning I click on the computer screen. Here's a video from CNN, and I have no control. I thought it was fake because I could not believe what my eyes were seeing. It was that stunning to me, because I had been meditating on this picture for 6 weeks, which was the bald eagle and Donald Trump. And how I mean, it's not as if presidential candidates stand there in their office with a bald eagle perched on their arm. You know what I'm saying? It's the only one, I think, probably ever. And I was like stunned. That's how I interpreted it. And then I reacted.
So tell the story now. You have this painting, and you want to have it appear in the Smithsonian.
Well,
and Trump
before I get there, I'll just give you a brief recap. From that moment,
Sure.
November 30th, 2015, I go and travel the country. I'm in Iowa on January 1st, 2016. I've never, caucuses, I didn't even know what a caucus was. I had no Iowa. I'm just going to go to Iowa. I got this truck. I stuck my painting in it, the huge painting. I put vinyl banners on the side of the truck and I drove it out there myself. I met some guy who came to a rally who was never voted before, but he decided he was going to vote for Trump. He was a cowboy. He wore a cowboy hat and a guitar. And we went and campaigned around Iowa for the next month. I did nearly 5,000 miles driving around the state of Iowa, town to town to town, with my painting, showing it where I could. If it wasn't the full painting, it was a smaller version of it. Amazing journey. That journey led me across the country. That journey would get me an invite in June of 2016 to Politicon in Pasadena, California, at the Art of Politics art show, hosted by the very patron and inspiration behind the Obama Hope poster by Shepard Fairey. Shepard Fairey was an artist that this guy named Odious and Cerberus. He was a political activist. He met him he was a street graffiti artist. Met him at an art show in LA, gave him $100, said, I want you to make this picture into a poster for me with Hope, the Obama. And this guy overnight he photoshopped this image, and that became the iconic Obama. Yeah. And Shepard Fairey was just the artist who produced it overnight for $100. Odious Cerberus was the brilliant marketing PR guy who took the picture and ran across the country and university campuses. Wow. And he made that image the iconic image it became. So in Pasadena, my painting was shown alongside it. He said, I can't stand Trump, but your painting is a vision of hope. I want it in my show. And it was...
That's what I was going to say. That's your version of hope.
It's a vision of hope. And he said it. He was one of the few very honest, I would call a left-wing or hardcore activist. Mm-hmm. He was unashamed. He said it outright. But we got on great. We respected each other. There was a camaraderie there in the sense that we understood the arts and it was a great. But other than that, there was a lot of hostility. So fast forward, I became a alternate delegate for Trump in New York State. I was at the RNC. Copy of the painting appeared on the screen at the RNC, which was amazing. My phone was ringing. People were like, we just saw you and you're painting on the screen. I mean, it's pretty cool. So I had some pretty cool things happen. And then fast forward now to November, to the election. Trump wins. Mm-hmm. I showed the painting at the RNC dinner right before the election, and big, thing up here in upstate New York. It was wonderful. Trump wins. I'm not surprised. Everyone's like, you were right. We can't believe it. It's like, the mockery stopped. The screaming stopped at me anyway, and people were screaming that he won now. And then after he won, I was like, what am I going to do? So I end up remembering after praying and saying, God, what am I going to do with this painting? A lot of people I met on my journey across the country, once they saw the portrait, they should say, this should be in the Smithsonian. That should be in the Smithsonian, they'd say. And I was like, okay, well, I don't even know what the Smithsonian really is. I knew it was a museum of spaceships and rockets. I was like, right. So I then start researching the Smithsonian. I find out that in Washington, D.C., there is the Smithsonian National Portrait Gallery. And then I find out, wow, in 2009 and 2013, they had shown the Obama Hope poster as a tribute to the incoming historic campaign of Barack Obama. And they had this big art political thing in the Smithsonian to celebrate the Obama win, and rightly so. Wonderful. That's great. So I said...
Do you think it's natural that it should happen with your painting for the same reasons?
It's the identical situation. The difference was mine was not as well known because the art world was hostile to me. As somebody who was both a Christian, a conservative, at the time a Republican, all I got was hostility and mockery and ridicule, just like constantly. There was no support. I got very, very little support. Even on the conservative side, the arts, they're celebrated and used powerfully on the left. They're not so, it's not on the right. It's like, and I was like in this no man's land. I'm like, my goodness, now I get grief over here and I'm ignored over here. So I'm like, whatever, I just keep going. So I then draft this application to the Smithsonian. I said, look at this. There's the Obama painting. This is they have precedent there. They're going to show it's not just it's not that they just showed this. They had a celebration of the inauguration of on January the 20th, 2013, 2009, of Barack Obama, his first win and his second win. They had big celebrations with this portrait.
Right.
In 2013, they had more portraits and huge portraits. And so I'm very encouraged. I get a lot of letters drafted by New York politicians, a senator, local senator, congressman, councilman, the mayor of Elmira, art collectors, a radio host. I had some really substantial letters of public support of my application to display my portrait. The Smithsonian has a permanent display of presidential portraits. It was not for that. This
wasn't it.
No, it was a temporary display. This was a loan to show maybe for 90 days or something when Trump was inaugurated, to have it in show that when people went to D.C. to the inauguration, that they could even go to the Smithsonian and see a painting, because there was no paintings, no portraits, no art for Trump. It was complete opposition that was going on. And I was like, this.
You felt encouraged with these local politicians? Did you feel somewhat encouraged that this could happen?
Yeah, well, they with the support that I got, I thought it was a sealed deal, because it wasn't just me saying I'd like to show my painting. It was the representatives of about 200,000 people were saying we wholeheartedly agree that this painting should be, whether they said on show or shown or considered for show, they all expressed the same support that it should be publicly shown as a tribute to this Barack Obama's presidency and his win. It's historic, amazing country, America, amazing.
Do you think it was because it was Trump? So you got turned down, correct? I'm jumping the gun a little bit.
But I thought I'd tell you what happened.
Go ahead.
How are we doing for time, Dan?
We're good. We're good. So we're
because
doing okay.
Yeah, the what happened next is again stunning in the journey, but it's sort of fitting as well, because it's like the scale of the story, the scale of the portrait, the duration of this journey. It would only make sense that something like this would happen. And unfortunately, I had intuition that this would happen. I've had enough involvement with people to know, and I even asked the mayor, because locally in Elmira and in Corning, New York, there is a museum called the Rockwell Museum. It's a Western art museum, and they were a Smithsonian Institution affiliate museum. So I could apply through them to the Smithsonian. And I spoke to the mayor and I said, do you know the director of the Rockwell? And he's like, no, I don't know. She said, what do you think of my chances? Do you think I'm just going to get tossed off the boat again? Because I had already so much hostility. The art world was so hostile, and there were so many stories at that time mocking, it's mockery about me from that from that side of the aisle. And unfortunately, the art world is run by people of that persuasion politically. So I had this huge hesitation. Again, I draft this application. I tell my story, the story of inspiration. I tell my journey. It's been seen across the country. It was seen here, It got great recognition. And here are the letters of support. And here's my application. And I'd like as a tribute. And I put those, even in the Rockwell, it began right there. The treatment was unbelievable. And I write about it in detail in my book. I had to file an official complaint against them, against the director of affiliate Smithsonian museums. His name is Harold Kloster. He was the only person, Dan, in this entire story that goes on with the Smithsonian. He was the only official who I dealt with who was professional. He was courteous. I wrote to him. I said, this is what went on here. I said, I really am shocked by the way they avoided me. I went in there with all of my applications to give them, and the woman's like, oh, well, they've all gone for lunch, the people that you need to speak to. I said, okay, I'll go for lunch too, and I'll come back afterwards. I came back, and they'd all gone home. They took off. It was unbelievable. They were doing everything to avoid me. And I pinned them down on their bias as well. Again, I write about it in detail, and you would laugh and cry with what went on locally. So anyway, I then write my application and send the letter to Harold Kloster, and he replies immediately, Mr. Raven, blah, 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 I got your thing. I'm going to forward it right now to Kim Sajet, the director of the... I mean, it was like professional, just as somebody doing his job. He's the only one. He's the only one in 8 years, 9 years.
Oh.
The only one. Stunning.
What happened next?
I called the National Portrait Gallery the next morning because I knew that he'd sent it. And I speak to the secretary of the director, and I introduce myself. I want to be forthright. This is who I am. Harold Kloster forwarded the application. I just wanted to find out if there's anything I could do. Here's my phone number. Just showing good faith that you're available. And she's like, well, we'll get back to you, or whatever. The director was not available, she says. And so she just said, we'll get back to you, type of thing. Typical. 15 minutes later, I get a call. I'm in my basement office in my little country home in Elmira, New York. I look at the number. It's the identical number I had dialed, except one digit was different. So I thought, oh, they're getting back to me. I answer it, and it's an Australian woman. Hello, this is Kim Sajet. This is the director of the National Portrait Gallery calling me back. I was not expecting this. I was sitting down, and I sort of stand up because it's the director of this national museum. I'm like wanting to show respect, even if, I just stood up to take the call, like, oh my goodness. Immediately, snooty, condescending attitude, immediately, off the bat. Denigrating my work. She's like, oh, is it that painting with the eagle and the flag? Like there's a hostility there are people on that side of they just despise American symbolism. The flag of the United States is this, or the eagle is this, and I'm like, I just painted this. Is amazing to me. It's a symbol of freedom. How in the world could you see that twisted view? So she's immediately like disregarding, and she says to me this. She says it's too big. I said, too big?
An excuse.
And I'm like, well, where does it say that, basically? And I start to push back. And she rapidly sort of, as well, let's move on. She moves on to something else. She says, well, it's not, she starts objecting. And she says, it's not from life. And I said, and as a portrait artist, if you paint somebody from life, it means that I'm sitting there with you in my studio or in your home, and I'm painting you on the canvas directly from life. She says, it's not from life. And I said, well, excuse me. I said, the Obama Hope poster, which was displayed in 2019 and that was not from life. I said, I know that story. My work was shown with them. And I know that story like the back of my hand. That was a digitized, it was a Photoshop photo. It wasn't even a painting. And mine is a painting. She says this. She says, yes, it was from life. She starts raising her voice and arguing with me. And that conversation became an 11-minute argument. As the woman constantly, as I refuted her, she pushed back with hostility, raising her voice, different arbitrary objections to this point, where it got to this next one, where she goes, it's too political. And I'm like, too political? I said, what, the Obama Hope poster is not political? I mean, it was the campaign political portrait of Barack Obama. Right. How much more political can you get? Mine's too political. And as she was being called to the carpet, it got to the point where her only final recourse against me was to basically sort of attack me personally, or go for the hurt of the artist and say, I know how hard, she's like sort of mockingly say, I know how hard it is for artists to hear when their work's rejected. And it is, your work's rejected, but whatever. If it's illegitimately rejected, that's a whole different matter. People can reject your work for whatever reason. But if it's illegitimately for arbitrary reason, that's the really bad, from such an authority. She's like, yeah, she's like sort of denigrating. And she then says to me, well, it's no good. And I said, it's no good. I said, you're looking at maybe a 4 by 6 inch picture on a computer screen.
So you had a terrible conversation with her, and obviously they weren't going to move forward with the painting. Well,
this is what she says, Dan, I got to tell you.
Sure.
Right after all those arbitrary objections, she's so mad, high-pitched, 11-minute at the end of the argument. She says this, I'm the director of the National Portrait Gallery. Your application will go no further. You can appeal it all you want. Click, and hangs up.
And that was a call to action to you.
Absolutely.
All right.
Absolutely.
So go ahead. Tell us this 9-year journey.
Well, life-changing. life-changing experience. Both as a celebration of being an American, because it's only in America where you could do something like this. You know, most countries on earth, you can't go and sue the government or you can't, by yourself without an attorney. And I didn't have the means. Here I have this woman taunting me. You can appeal it all you want. Well, appeal it, I did. And I filed the lawsuits, and I studied, and I learned, and I did all this myself because I didn't have the means to do it, to hire lawyers or anything like that. But it is a marvelous celebration of America and of who we are and the legal system that we have. Listen, the legal system is the best thing on earth. The people in it, America is only as good as the moral values of the individuals in those systems. If we have corrupt people in a system, it's going to corrupt the system. The system is amazing. It's a good system. It's not heaven on earth, but it's an amazing system that's only as good, like I said, as the moral values of the people who are running it. So when you come up against people who are political activists using their position to enforce their agenda, which this woman was, because get this, January the 21st, 2017, Kim Sajet, who was the director of the National Portrait Gallery, she goes on an anti-Trump march the day after he's inaugurated in D.C. with the Women's March protesting Trump, and she's sending selfies to the Smithsonian National Directors page, standing there at the protest, protesting the inauguration of the president. This is the revelation of who this woman was. And listen, in private, that's who you are. Wonderful. It's America. You disagree, great. But you use taxpayer dollars, or you use a platform, and you use it to silence speech and silence an artist you disagree with, or you despise me because I happen to be someone who painted a portrait of a guy you hated. I mean, you remember how people lost their minds after Trump won. And she obviously was one of these people. And it's like, well, listen, have the decency to either resign your post and say you're just incapable of being an objective professional, or you know what I'm saying? It's like, or no, just cling on to power and let me silence this guy. And it really felt like to me, because
I think it's such an important position that she wouldn't express her political views one way or the other. Why would you antagonize the new president of the United States? That doesn't make any sense.
It doesn't. And this is what we are dealing with. And again, it's like became my destiny, which was not an accident. So I then go into battle. I found out about the Smithsonian after that happened. The Board of Regents is made up of the Chief Justice, John Roberts, and the Vice President, and 3 members of Congress, and 3 members of the House, 7 members of the public. And I was like, I said, the Chief Justice of the United States, he's going to hear my appeal as Chancellor of the Smithsonian. He's going to see what she did and hear what she did, and he's going to say, this is outrageous. How could she behave like that? You're fired, or whatever had to happen. No. They just cast me aside. I begin my legal journey. I'm suing them in federal court, not knowing what I'm doing, learning as I go.
You figured it out.
You just had to do what you had to do. And 2019, I appealed all the way back up to the Supreme Court, because the Smithsonian Institution, and this was what we discussed as far as being a revelation or an awakening. The Smithsonian Institution, about the legal nature, what is the entity status of the Smithsonian Institution? I knew nothing about it. I knew nothing about nothing except the name. All of my research began to show me that what I was learning about, there was some major inconsistency with what I had walked into. I didn't even know the term at the time. I didn't know the term fiduciary. I didn't know what it meant. I knew intuitively that what she had done to me was not only silent, because I felt trampled. I felt violated. I felt like someone they had silenced me. I felt physically or mentally violated. I was stunned. I was silent. I stood there after that phone call like I had been hit by a bat. I was physically immobilized by what had happened. What I find out, as I'm in my gut, I'm like, it's more than just she's silencing me. It's more than my speech, something else. And this begins to lead me then on a study of Smithsonian history. What is the institution? Finding all the books, the history books. And then I begin to find out, wow, this institution is basically just a private charity. It's a charitable trust. It's like a church. It's like it is a non-profit institution. Should have been, as it was originally created. And employees and people that work in the Smithsonian are bound by these fiduciary duties: the duty of care, the duty of loyalty, the duty of impartiality, the duty to administer the trust solely in the interest of the beneficiaries of the trust, who are the American people. We the people, we are the recipients of the gift that James Smithson gave to the United States when he died, that in Washington, an institution by the name of the Smithsonian Institution, after his name, James Smithson, would be established for the increase and diffusion of knowledge. That was his will. He gave his fortune, $541,000 in 1836, equivalent to about maybe $60 or $80 million today. It was a fortune. He gave it to build an institution with his name on it. He wanted his name. He was an illegitimate royal bastard, and that's who he was. He was born out of wedlock of two royal families in England. He was born in Paris because they had to flee the Victorian shame. It was the bastardy laws that existed. He died in Italy, in Genoa, so he was a non-Brit in that sense. He'd never come to the United States. Nobody wanted his money. Nobody could get his money because of the stigma attached to it that he was illegitimate, and he sends his money to the United States. And so they build this institution, which was a gift to the American people. And now, sadly, it's sort of morphed into something it wasn't meant to be. And the American people are paying for it with tax appropriations. That's sort of one of the crazy ironies. But the point is that what she did to me violated some of the most sacred duties of fiduciaries when they are entrusted with administering and executing the will of a dead man, James Smithson, an institution for the increase and diffusion of knowledge. My painting was a massive 102 square foot increase of knowledge surrounding a historic American event of a non-politician, Donald Trump, who captures the White House and defeats 17 Republicans and 4 Democrats. A remarkable historic moment. The Smithsonian National Portrait Gallery, specifically designed and built for the historic people of the United States to be captured and their stories told in portraits. That's why it exists. It's there for people who have affected the history and culture of the United States. And I come up against this political activist who does everything to violate the law, violate breach her trust duties, and call up a beneficiary like she did, and harass and denigrate and trample on the rights of the beneficiaries, which she did, and then taunt me at the end. You can appeal it all you want. Now, I did, and I've been appealing it for 9 years, and it's gone on 3 lawsuits, all the way up until May this year when Donald Trump, as president once again, points his finger at the Smithsonian. He knows my case. It was number 4 on the president's list of 17 reasons to fire her because people had told her, he said, she's a highly partisan person. Someone like Ed Martin, who's in the DOJ, he had me on his radio show 3 years ago with my book. He knows the whole story. These people are now working in the Department of Justice, and they said, this woman needs to go. And the president stood up and said she should be fired. The whole then political thing began to unravel. He didn't have the authority to do it. She ends up resigning. And my case now, I filed my 3rd case against the Smithsonian as a result of this.
You're keeping going, Julian. Just quickly, of all those 9 years, and you make a very strong argument, what was the response of the courts? Did they say it was a private institution and they could do what they want? What was their logic behind their decisions to date?
The Smithsonian Institution is an enigma. It's a legal anomaly because it has been allowed to morph into something that it is not. And I have the words of, for example, Chief Justice Warren Burger. I have a speech he gave where he specifically says that the courts themselves do not know what the Smithsonian is. He says they get it wrong all the time. The Smithsonian legal status has never been defined properly at the U.S. Supreme Court. My case, my lawsuits are the only ones against the Smithsonian that have gone to the Supreme Court and was rejected by the Supreme Court. John Roberts recused himself because he's also chancellor of the Smithsonian Institution, and he was a defendant. The Smithsonian entity status is such an anomaly that when I argued, as I did, even just speaking to you, but extensively, they brushed it all aside, and Judge Trevor McFadden in 2018 said, oh no, the Smithsonian, he says this, the Smithsonian might have been private, but Congress ratified it, whatever that sentence means. He basically made up legal soup. And then he said the Smithsonian is the government through and through. And that was his statement without any citation of any law. There was no congressional act to modify the Congressional Act of 1846, the institution, the establishment of the Smithsonian. There was nothing. I was the one that quoted it all. He just made it up. He didn't quote anything. And he says, and he had to do that to defend. The Smithsonian has such prestige in D.C.
Right.
that he sided with the status quo to side. And the only way to deprive me of my rights, because you know, as an attorney, it was clear that the government-run museum, because even though it's private charity, it is run by the government. They are the trustees of the Smithsonian. They denied me my free speech rights by saying this, because it's very clear that Obama had his painting shown, which gave me legal right to show mine. Once the government allows any political speech in any forum it controls to take place, they cannot silence any political speech, no matter what it is. That's clearly established in all of the cases throughout the country. So in order for him to silence me, he said this, no, the Smithsonian is so much the government, it's such the government that it has government speech powers, and the government speech powers trump your First Amendment free speech rights in this case. And it's lunacy what he said, because what he basically said was that the Board of Regents, made up of the Chief Justice and the Vice President and 3 members of Congress and 3 members of the House and 9 members of the public, suddenly have become this 3-headed beast. He called it Cerberus. That's why I called my book Odious and Cerberus. You'll see the beast right there on the steps.
Right.
He created a 3-headed legal government agency in violation of the separation of powers. There is no agency, there's no government function where the Congress, the legislature, and the judiciary and the executive come together, sit at a table and hold hands and make legal decisions as the government. The whole point of our government was to keep them, it's the government, but it's separate, so that there would be checks and balances between them. Judge McFadden's ruling is a fiction. It's a legal fiction. He made it up. And it's still on the books because SCOTUS refused to hear my petition. And I was asking the Chief Justice and the 9 or 8 other justices, I was saying, listen, this is an anomaly. You guys have to answer this question. What is the Smithsonian Institution? What is it legally? Because once they answer that, all of our rights will fall into place, and citizens will know what rights we have. Artists will know what rights we have when we go to the Smithsonian. No one will be standing in this legal limbo like I am until they clearly define what the Smithsonian Institution is. And that, Dan, is what I believe, by the grace of God, because of what the president is doing right now, and my latest lawsuit may finally compel the Supreme Court to answer that question.
Well, I have to tell you this, just in summary. I don't think a lawyer could have done a better job than you are doing. You're obviously very passionate about the issue. You've studied it. You've made very cogent arguments. You're clearly very principled with multiple lawsuits. I think it's remarkable that you're continuing the fight. I give you tremendous amount of credit for doing so. I think it's a tremendous story, and I'm glad you shared it. I urge everybody to get your book to hear more. And maybe next time, hopefully, you'll be successful in your battle. We could do a postscript to the podcast.
Absolutely.
But Julian, you were terrific. And I want to thank you so much for being on the podcast today. It really was a very fascinating story. And you're certainly a man of inspiration and discipline. And when you believe in something, you go for it. So I think that's fantastic.
Thank you, Dan. It's been a pleasure. Thank you. I appreciate being on with you.
All right. Thank you, Julian. Thank you for listening or watching this episode. If you enjoyed our guest, please go to our website, awakeningsinreallife.com, where our guest shares a story different than their awakening. It's really very interesting. We also have bonus episodes where another individual tells their awakening story. Please also check out my book, Awakenings in Real Life, where I tell the story of my dad's awakening from his dementia and the message he sends that he still lives and appreciates life. It's available on Amazon pre-sale and also tells other family stories. If you know of someone who wants to be a guest on the show and has an awakening, please email me at info@awakeningsinreallife.com. We're also available on social media. Please tune in to our next episode where we share another remarkable awakening story. Finally, I want to thank Jay Belsky of Flawed Media of Rockville Center, New York, who did such a great job recording this episode.